Kayla Unbehaun was born in 2014 in the state of Illinois. She lived with her parents, Heather Unbehaun and Ryan Izurka. In early 2017, her parents separated. Following the separation, custody proceedings took place in Kane County, Illinois. A court order granted primary custody of Kayla to her father, Ryan Izurka, with her mother receiving limited visitation rights under court supervision. On July 4, 2017, Kayla, who was 3 years old at the time, was scheduled to return to her father after a 4th of July holiday visitation with her mother. Heather Unbehaun failed to return Kayla as required by the custody order. When Kayla was not brought back, Ryan Izurka contacted authorities. Law enforcement determined that Heather had taken Kayla without permission and had violated the custody agreement. The South Elgin Police Department in Illinois began investigating the case immediately. Officers determined that Heather Unbehaun had left the state with Kayla. A felony warrant was issued for Heather on charges of child abduction. The Kane County State's Attorney's Office pursued the charge under Illinois law for unlawful violation of custody. Law enforcement agencies began searching for Heather and Kayla, but their location was unknown. Shortly after the abduction was confirmed, Kayla Unbehaun's information was entered into the National Crime Information Center database. Her case was also submitted to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, known as NCMEC. NCMEC issued a missing child alert and distributed age-progressed images over time to reflect how Kayla might appear as she grew older. Because authorities believed Heather had intentionally fled with Kayla to avoid detection, the case was treated as a parental child abduction investigation rather than a stranger abduction. Investigators determined that Heather had ties outside Illinois. Authorities believed she may have left the Midwest and could have traveled across state lines. The Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved due to the interstate nature of the case. A federal warrant was issued for Heather Unbehaun for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Despite these measures, the location of Heather and Kayla remained unknown for several years. During the investigation, Ryan Izurka publicly stated that he believed his daughter had been taken to avoid compliance with the court's custody order. He worked with law enforcement and NCMEC to keep Kayla's case in the public eye. Over the years, her image and identifying information were shared through missing children campaigns, social media posts, and public service announcements. The case remained open as authorities pursued leads and tips. Between 2017 and 2023, law enforcement received periodic tips regarding possible sightings of Heather and Kayla. Each reported sighting was investigated, but none resulted in confirmed identification. Investigators believed Heather may have been living under assumed identities or in communities where she could avoid attention. There was no confirmed communication from Heather to law enforcement during this period, and there was no indication that Kayla had been enrolled in Illinois schools after her disappearance. On May 13, 2023, a breakthrough occurred in Asheville, North Carolina. A store owner recognized Heather Unbehaun and Kayla from a Netflix documentary episode that featured the case. The episode was part of the series Unsolved Mysteries, which had included Kayla's disappearance in a segment about parental abductions. After recognizing them, the store owner contacted local authorities. The Asheville Police Department responded and confirmed the identities of Heather Unbehaun and Kayla. Kayla was found safe and unharmed. At the time she was located, she was 9 years old. Heather Unbehaun was taken into custody without incident. She was charged as a fugitive of justice based on the outstanding Illinois warrant. Following her arrest, Heather was held in the Buncombe County Detention Facility in North Carolina. The Kane County State's Attorney's Office confirmed that Illinois authorities would seek her extradition. A bond was initially set at $250,000. Within days of her arrest, Heather posted bond and was released pending further court proceedings. Legal proceedings regarding extradition and the underlying abduction charge continued. After Kayla was located, arrangements were made for her to return to Illinois. Law enforcement coordinated with Child Protection Services to ensure her safe transfer to her father. Ryan Izurka issued a public statement through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, expressing relief and gratitude that his daughter had been found safe after nearly 6 years. Authorities confirmed that Kayla was reunited with her father. In June 2023, Heather Unbehaun agreed to waive extradition and returned to Illinois to face charges. Court proceedings were scheduled in Kane County. She faced a charge of child abduction, a felony offense under Illinois law. Prosecutors stated that the charge related specifically to the 2017 violation of the custody order. In early 2024, Heather Unbehaun entered a plea agreement in Kane County Court. She pled guilty to a lesser charge related to unlawful violation of custody. Under the terms of the agreement, she was sentenced to 2 years of probation. The agreement included credit for time served in custody and conditions requiring compliance with court orders. Throughout the case, authorities consistently described the disappearance as a parental abduction. There was no public evidence indicating that Kayla had suffered physical harm while she was missing. However, law enforcement officials noted that parental abductions can create significant legal and emotional consequences for children and families. The Kayla Unbehaun case illustrates how parental custody disputes can escalate into criminal cases when court orders are violated. It also demonstrates the role of public awareness campaigns and media exposure in locating missing persons. The identification of Heather and Kayla in North Carolina occurred after a member of the public recognized them from televised coverage, underscoring the importance of distributing updated images and case information. The investigation spanned nearly 6 years and involved cooperation among multiple agencies, including the South Elgin Police Department, the Kane County State's Attorney's Office, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Asheville Police Department, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The case remained active in national missing child databases throughout that time. After Kayla's recovery and Heather's legal resolution, law enforcement officially cleared Kayla from missing persons records. Authorities emphasized that the successful recovery was the result of sustained investigative effort and public engagement. Ryan Izurka continued to advocate for awareness regarding parental abduction cases and the importance of adhering to court-ordered custody agreements. The case formally concluded with the resolution of the criminal charge in 2024. Kayla Unbehaun's disappearance, which began with a custody violation in July 2017, ended with her safe recovery in May 2023 and the subsequent court proceedings in Illinois. The legal system addressed the violation through probation and monitoring, bringing the criminal aspect of the case to a close. Kayla Unbehaun's case remains documented in missing child and cold case archives as an example of a long-term parental abduction resolved through interagency cooperation and public assistance. Law enforcement agencies continue to encourage anyone aware of missing child cases to report information promptly and to comply with court-ordered custody agreements to prevent similar incidents. On the morning of January 28, 2009, emergency responders were called to a home in Louisville, Kentucky after a fire was reported at the residence of 51-year-old Larry Fuller. Firefighters from Louisville Fire and Rescue arrived and extinguished the blaze. Once the fire was under control, responders discovered Larry Fuller deceased inside the home. What initially appeared to be a residential fire quickly became a homicide investigation when authorities determined that Fuller had died before the fire started. The Louisville Metro Police Department began investigating the case. Detectives determined that the fire had been intentionally set. The Jefferson County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy and concluded that Larry Fuller's cause of death was multiple stab wounds. The fire was determined to be arson, likely set in an attempt to conceal the homicide and destroy evidence. Larry Fuller was a resident of Louisville and known in his neighborhood. Investigators canvassed the area, interviewed neighbors, and attempted to identify any suspicious activity or persons seen near the residence in the hours before the fire. Detectives also examined Fuller's recent contacts, phone records, and personal relationships to identify potential motives or suspects. In the days following the homicide, investigators learned that Fuller may have allowed acquaintances to stay at his home from time to time. Police developed information indicating that several individuals had been present at the residence shortly before his death. Detectives focused on determining who had last seen Fuller alive and who might have had access to the home. Evidence collected from the scene included items damaged by fire, blood evidence, and materials associated with the arson. Forensic technicians processed the home for fingerprints and other trace evidence. Because the fire had caused significant damage, some evidence was compromised, complicating the investigation. During the early stages of the investigation, police identified persons of interest but did not immediately file charges. The case remained open as detectives continued interviewing witnesses and analyzing forensic results. Authorities released limited public details to preserve the integrity of the investigation. In 2010, approximately 1 year after the homicide, Louisville Metro Police arrested 2 individuals in connection with Larry Fuller's death. The suspects were identified as Jeffrey Mundy and Crystal McKinney. Both were charged with murder and arson. According to court records, investigators alleged that the pair had been at Fuller's residence on the night of the killing. Prosecutors stated that evidence indicated Fuller had been stabbed multiple times during an altercation inside the home. After the stabbing, the suspects allegedly set fire to the residence before leaving the scene. Authorities indicated that robbery may have been a motive, though specific details about stolen property were not extensively released publicly. Both suspects were held in custody pending trial. Court proceedings began in Jefferson County Circuit Court. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, witness testimony, and statements gathered during the investigation. The defense challenged aspects of the evidence, including credibility of witnesses and interpretation of forensic findings. In 2013, Crystal McKinney entered a guilty plea to charges related to the homicide. As part of a plea agreement, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter and arson. In exchange for her plea and cooperation, prosecutors recommended a reduced sentence. McKinney was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mundy proceeded to trial. During court proceedings, prosecutors argued that Mundy played a direct role in stabbing Fuller and setting the fire. The jury reviewed evidence including autopsy findings confirming multiple stab wounds and fire investigation reports indicating the blaze was deliberately set using an accelerant. In 2014, Jeffrey Mundy was convicted of murder and arson. The jury recommended a life imprisonment for the murder conviction along with additional time for the arson charge. The judge imposed the recommended sentence and Mundy was sentenced to life in prison. Throughout the investigation and trial process, authorities described the case as a homicide followed by arson intended to conceal the crime. Fire investigators testified that the burn patterns and damage were consistent with intentional ignition rather than accidental causes. The autopsy confirmed that Fuller had died from stab wounds before the fire began, ruling out death due to smoke inhalation. Larry Fuller's family members attended court proceedings and later made statements acknowledging the conclusion of the case through convictions and sentencing. Law enforcement officials stated that cooperation between homicide detectives, fire investigators, forensic specialists, and prosecutors contributed to resolving the case. The homicide of Larry Fuller was officially closed following the convictions and sentencing of both defendants. The case remains documented in local criminal justice archives as a homicide involving intentional fire setting to conceal evidence. Law enforcement agencies continue to review similar cases to ensure proper forensic processing when fire scenes may involve violent crimes. Court records indicate that both defendants had prior criminal histories before the homicide. Those histories were considered during sentencing. The plea agreement with McKinney reflected her cooperation with investigators and willingness to testify if necessary. Mundy's conviction followed a full trial in which jurors reviewed the evidence presented by both sides. The case moved from initial discovery of a fire scene in January 2009 to final sentencing several years later. During that time, detectives maintained contact with prosecutors and forensic analysts to ensure that evidence met standards for courtroom presentation. The homicide investigation demonstrated the importance of fire origin analysis, autopsy findings, and witness interviews in determining the facts surrounding a suspicious death. While the fire initially obscured the circumstances, forensic examination clarified that Larry Fuller had been fatally injured before the residence was set ablaze. As of the conclusion of court proceedings, Jeffrey Mundy remains incarcerated under a life sentence. Crystal McKinney is serving her sentence in accordance with Kentucky Department of Corrections records, subject to applicable parole guidelines. The Larry Fuller homicide began with a residential fire report in 2009 and concluded with convictions for murder and arson several years later. The investigation transitioned from a suspected accidental fire to a confirmed homicide based on medical and forensic findings. Through coordinated investigative efforts and prosecution, authorities obtained guilty pleas and verdicts that brought the case to a legal resolution. This case is recorded in local criminal justice archives as a homicide involving intentional fire setting to conceal evidence. Law enforcement agencies continue to review similar cases to ensure proper forensic processing when fire scenes may involve violent crimes.